All right, let's continue to unpack what has been a very, very messy situation. It's the aftermath of the claims by U.S. Ambassador to South Africa, Reuben Brigety, that South Africa supplied Russia with weapons. Now, Brigety has since apologized and said he should have followed appropriate channels. Well, the allegations seen the rand plummet. It is recovering this morning, currently about 19.07, but at its worst last week, dropped to 19 rand 52 cents to the US dollar. Governments come out and said they are going to set up an inquiry into the allegations, and the US and South Africa looking to smooth over the troubled waters, if you will. Let's bring in political economist and director of the Center for Social Change at UJA, University of Johannesburg, Professor Patrick Bond, joining us. Good to talk to you, Prof. First of all, can I just ask about this apology? Do you get the sense the ambassador was apologizing for the way he said what he said, or was he apologizing for what he said? I think it's two very different things. Agree or disagree?
Yes, you're right. It's great to be with you. Thanks, Gareth, for having me. The question of whether he apologized should have been cleared up in his tweets, but he didn't say he apologized. He said he clarified. What we've heard from Clayton Maniela, the Durko, our foreign ministry spokesperson, was an unreserved apology. So we're already at another disjuncture as to what happened, even on Friday when the démarché, when Brigety was called in. Just like the big question, what was on Lady R? We still don't know.
So how does this now get handled then between the US, South Africa and Russia? Because we know there's been conversations between South Africa and Russia. How do we now handle the US situation? Yeah, we asked this question on air this morning, Prof, and I'm sure you've been very busy, but most of you are saying they don't accept his apology as the US ambassador. Does he get sanctioned? Does he get recalled? Or do we wait for this inquiry?
You know, the fact that he was such a loudhailer, so brazen, an ugly American, a bully boy, as people have been saying, reflects, I think, that they have run out of internal processes. And yesterday we heard our finance minister, Enoch Godongwana, explain how the counterpart in the US, the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, in February, had been berating Godongwana because exactly this Lady R allegation that South Africa uploaded arms was not yet resolved. And this was now at 6 months. And what Godongwana said, it wasn't us, but we don't know if there were mischief makers. That was his term. So what mischief makers might South Africa blame if indeed the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency has some kind of internal information about there being weapons? Would it not have been the South African government if a Navy base was used? Would it have been one of our private sector arms dealers? Now, Rheinmetall is a German company with Denel, and they haven't been active, according to Mondli Gokombela, the head of the National Conventional Arms Control Committee. They haven't been active for 3 years, but one company has, Paramount, the largest private sector supplier. Then they've been supplying, and last November cut a major deal with Saudi Arabia. And last October, Saudi Arabia and Russia started doing arms deals, also to the consternation of many in the United States. The Republican House of Representatives will be a very tough place for anyone, whether you're Saudi or South African, to defend those deals with Russia. So there may be some indirect relationships that have been set up over the years that did, in fact, allow, just as South Africa exports plenty of arms to NATO countries. 7 NATO countries received South African arms, according to Arms Corps' annual report last year, including the U.S., led by Germany and Britain. So we have an arms industry that's quite active and I think being quite destructive in diplomatic terms. Whether or not it was on Lady R, this is not a particularly healthy export industry, is it?
There was a big argument going backwards and forwards last week, despite what the ambassador had said or hadn't said or had implied and how it was done. Aside from that, Professor, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. Many people weighing in and saying that we're a sovereign nation, we're a sovereign country. Why should we have to answer to the United States if the allegation is true that weapons were provided to Russia, or even if they weren't provided to Russia? What right does the US have to question our government and say that South Africa can't do this? Help me understand that line of thought.
Well, my bias would be to say that the U.S. is imperialist and it does what it wants, and hypocrisy is, part and parcel of that. So if you start with that assumption, then the next question is, well, what are the weapons that the U.S. will use against South Africa? And the main one is exclusion from the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which mainly will hit minerals, metals, petrochemicals, some of our energy-intensive industries. Many of us would say, well, maybe those industries are getting too much of our electricity and we should be giving small businesses and rural women and others who desperately need the electricity a bit more and a bit less to the likes of BHP Billiton and Sasol. So there's a concern about whether, in fact, the disconnection of some of the AGOA relationships that everyone's worried about, because that has implications for foreign exchange and for some jobs, although these are very capital intensive. Maybe that could be a blessing in disguise. But I think on your bigger question of South African sovereignty, the really serious dilemma is whether this in-between position, especially with South Africa hosting the BRICS in late August and the BRICS Plus, probably in the next year, expanding the BRICS to include the likes of Iran, sanctioned by the US, and Saudi Arabia, UAE, which we're having so many problems with on the Gupta extradition, Kazakhstan, Egypt, many dictatorships. Now, the National Conventional Arms Control Committee has had a farcical relationship with exports to some of those countries and has been condemned by the Auditor General for 58, let's say, ersatz arms deals in 2010, and by Amnesty International, and I think by anyone concerned about the geopolitical tensions. So South Africa must really, I think, begin to identify whether this government is leaning to Putin and allowing him to visit in August, or leaning to the West, or I think what many of us would like is as arm's length of distance between these tyrannical regimes of, Russia, perhaps China, but also the imperial regime in Washington. And I think keeping, let's say, skepticism of both Washington and Moscow is entirely appropriate. And this kerfuffle over what happened on the Lady R is just one minor reflection of the dangers involved.
Yeah, and many people are referring to it as a only child sitting between two divorced parents, trying to figure out which way is the right way to go. Professor Patrick Bond, it's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time and joining us here on eNCA.